So thank you all again for joining today's AI in construction, focused on project workflows. We do these once a month, where we try to connect all of the hype and all the conversations around AI into actual things that are going on in the world. So we've talked about field workflows in the past. We talked about contract and document workflows, and today I'm pleased to be joined by Cumulus Systems. We'll let everybody introduce themselves shortly, to talk a little bit about how AI has really supercharged the process that they'd already been doing for a while, which is taking processes and really helping to codify them and turn them into checklists and SOPs, standard operating procedures, to minimize error, minimize risk, and generally just help teams to do a better, cleaner job as they're executing things that you do often. So without actually really any further ado, I'd like to invite Matt Kleiman to introduce a little bit about what his company does, but also really drill in on what the problem is we're discussing here.
Thanks, Hugh. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. Really appreciate the invite. My name is Matt Kleiman. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Cumulus, and we are a quality management system for the field. And as Hugh said, we transform standard operating procedures into easy-to-use workflows, and then collect evidence that those procedures were actually followed in the field. And really excited to talk today about how we are using AI to really supercharge what we've been doing for the last 5 years. And so I'm joined by my co-founder and CTO, Chiz Chikwendu. Chiz, you want to say hello?
Good morning, everyone. It's great to meet you, and I'm happy to be here.
And the order of the agenda today is we're going to talk about a couple of things. First, we're going to talk about the problem that we're solving, just to provide some context. And then we're going to do a couple of demos. One, how we transform operating procedures into workflows pre-AI, and then how we do it with AI, and how that's really transformed things in the last year. And then Chiz is really going to do a deep dive into how we have built what we built. So really kind of for the really geared for both technical and non-technical folks, but getting into the weeds of what's going on under the hood in the system, which I think, so it's not just meant to be a demo, hey, here, look how cool it is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. So hopefully more people in the construction world, the technology world, can get ideas and apply AI to their own products and services.
And actually, as an aside, one of the reasons I was excited about this is this idea that we already have a lot of processes, and we already have a lot of software that is doing various things. And a lot of what's being discussed is, how is AI adding to that? How is adding generative AI specifically going to make it better, faster, reduce risk, increase productivity, and so on? So I really like that this is an example of how there was something already there. So it wasn't a problem and somebody hopped into OpenAI and made something out of scratch, but rather said, hey, we've been doing this for a while. How's this going to make it better, faster, better overall? Matt, do you want to share your screen so you can drive? I think you ought to be able to just grab the share.
Sure, I'll do that. Let's see. All right, let me share.
So while we do this, along the way, folks, if you have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. Either I or Matt, I'll keep track of them as a moderator, but we can either answer them in the flow or we can answer them later. But definitely feel free to pop in questions. I'll be keeping an eye on it. So
all right.
Over to you. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Hugh. And are you able to see the screen?
Yep.
All right. Good stuff. Okay. So the problem that Cumulus was started to solve is the problem of rework. As why I'm sure most of you know and have heard, there's a widely cited statistic of about 30% of work in construction is rework. Both Chiz and I, before we got into the construction field, both worked in aerospace. So when we started working in construction and saw the amount of rework on jobs, and we were working in the energy industry on capital projects and in operations, it was really shocking to us, because we come, as I said, from the aerospace world, and you can imagine if 30% of aircraft that come off the assembly line had defects of one sort or another, the kind of safety risk that would pose, and the national and international uproar that would ensue, and it would just be completely unacceptable. And you could think about that in other life-critical industries. Think about medical devices. Same thing, where if you had 30% failure rate in medical devices, the kind of liability that that would generate and safety risk. So we looked at this and we said this has to get better. And we tried to really understand how are we as an industry, and I mean that by construction industry, dealing with the problem of rework and quality management today. And the typical response is more paperwork, more inspections. But if you look at the statistics over time, that the rework rates don't get any better. And this goes back, you can look at data going back decades. It is a consistent problem. The rework and manual human inspections, the paperwork just doesn't make a difference in the field. And a lot of that is contracting structure. And a lot of the risk is seemingly contracted away. It means it doesn't disappear, but companies in the industry have figured out creative ways to move liability around so that nobody feels it just becomes part of doing business. And we said, you know what, there's a better way to do this. Let's look around at other industries, like where we came from in aerospace and others. How is this problem being solved there? And that's where we looked at quality management systems. Quality management systems are not new. They exist in all kinds of industries, but typically optimized for a factory or assembly line setting, not for the field. And applying the same sort of rigor and transparency and traceability to the field is a very different problem. And that's where workflows become important, and the digitalization of workflows and standard operating procedures become important. Because what if we could create a standard operating procedure that minimizes errors in the same way that a quality management system in an airplane factory, a medical device factory, pick your critical industry, the way that they do? And there's already a drive in construction to make construction more like a factory, more like an assembly line with modularization and other similar initiatives. But we're still having these rework rates, and the rework impacts safety and impacts budget, quality, and cost. So that is not getting better. But making this more factory-like, making our quality management more factory-like, will improve that. And so that's what we did. And not to get too much into this being all about how great Cumulus is, because we really want to get into the details of AI, but just to show that this has been successful, applying a manufacturing-like quality management system to the field can make a big difference. And this was a paper we published last year with one of our customers. A GC wanted to prevent leaks and enforce engineering controls on a major construction project. Before they started using Cumulus, the top in gray is what their workflow for doing this looked like. And this was all documented in paper through every step of this process. And they replaced it with our system. One thing we were able to do, once you digitalize something, it becomes a lot easier to see where inefficiencies are. So we're able to take a lot of the redundancy out of it and just make it a much cleaner, more efficient process. And that's the difference between the gray and the blue lines. And then they had a tremendous success rate in terms of reducing the leak rate from over 10% on projects where they weren't using Cumulus down to 0.1%, saving thousands of labor hours, greenhouse gas emissions. And this was deployed at scale. There were more than 2,000 workers using this on their project. So this is not something that was done in a workshop or for a very small piece of the work. And the reason you get this type of performance is when you digitalize a workflow, you get data in a structured manner, and this is going to become important for the AI discussion. You get structured data that you will not see if you're just using a standard check sheet or even just taking a photograph or filling out a checklist at the end of a job. You're looking at things like work performance. So how does quality versus productivity at an individual contractor or an individual worker level look? How long are things actually taking compared to what we think they're going to take, or how much we're planning on them to take? So how is this impacting schedule? And by having this visibility into workflows, and some of them you can see on the right-hand side, you could really see, okay, here's where we're inefficient. Let's try to understand why we're inefficient. Where in the process are there inefficiencies? All this data is now available, and we're able to use it in conjunction with LLMs in a really interesting way that we'll show in a couple of minutes. And then the final example is just to talk a little bit about COVID, where one of the most probably dramatic force majeures to hit construction in the last few years. On many of our projects, I'm sure many of your projects, as folks on the call, were suddenly shut down in March 2020, kind of without warning. Suddenly COVID was here. Everybody had to figure out how to deal with it. And this is one of our customers talking about how when they shut down the job site, then they restarted it 6 weeks later with all kinds of engineering of COVID controls. They lost a ton of paperwork. Everything that was being managed on paper seemed to have disappeared. And this caused thousands of hours and millions of dollars of rework because there wasn't documentation of where the workers were when they suddenly had to leave the job site in March 2020. But because with a digital system like ours, because it was at the step-by-step worker level, they were able to just pick it right back up and start again. And that was hugely valuable to them for the work that was being managed. So this is the state of the art of where we are today with workflows. Hopefully that was helpful in setting context. And now what we're going to show is what the system that we talked about that for the last couple of slides, what that looks like up until today. And I'll turn it over to Chiz to do that. So how this worked without AI.
Great. Thanks, Matt. And once again, I'm Chiz Chikwendu, and I am the CTO at Cumulus, and it's good to be here with you all. So as Matt was saying, we had this vision where we wanted to figure out how to take workflows from standard operating procedures or manuals or work instructions and sort of like precipitate that in a digital format where individuals can actually take that information, go to the field, do the work. And we want to do it in a manner that was flexible, meaning that you could be somebody working for a railroad and you want to figure out how to maintain a tank car, or you could be somebody that is doing a different kind of work that has nothing to do with where we originated from in terms of our origin in FAA in regulated industries like, aerospace. So whatever workflows you want to deal with, you want to be able to codify that. And we're looking for a framework to allow people to do that flexibly without actually having to develop code, and put that into the hands of workers. And it would have the benefit of not only walking them through the procedure that they have to go through on a day-by-day basis, but it reinforces their learning and at the same time allows them to collect information that is independent of let's say the word of mouth in terms of what they did. You can actually see from tools and from other sorts of attached data what they actually did, and there's the evidence that you need to make a determination as to how the work was done. So that was the goal. So the workflow builder was going to be this kind of cookbook that allows you to put together some sort of a recipe for doing anything in the world that you wanted to do. And the way we set about doing it was to initially create a UI that was somewhat cumbersome. Let me see if I can actually share my screen and see if you can see what it looks like.
Green button.
I see it, but let me know when you see my screen or my window. Do you see it?
Yep.
Just came up.
Great. So what you're looking at is essentially a web application with a user interface that has building blocks for the kinds of operations and steps that an individual might be able to take. So in this case, we're looking at something that is more oriented towards flange management or connections. You take pieces of these UI, you can drag it and you can drop it into the web view. You can go deeper into each one of the workflows and operations and actually begin to type in or enter the information that is pertinent to the sorts of steps and operations that you want to do. And then this gives you a visual representation of the workflow. and the series of operations you can take. And some of them are conditional on certain types of information that you put in the system. As you can see, it's a bit cumbersome to look at. And from a software developer perspective, it can be hard to manage because you want to be able to copy this, or you want to be able to change different parameters depending on the industry that you operate in. So this can be a heavy lift for any organization to do. And this is why many people look for low-code applications to be able to do things like this. So when ChatGPT came out, within our organization, some of our engineers, particularly some of our lead engineers and our VP of software, we were thinking, and they were saying, hey, why don't we look at ways we can leverage AI to make it work easier for us, right? So it's like, how do we generate reports flexibly so that a customer can easily see what information they need from us without necessarily asking us? And then another engineer said, hey, why don't we use the LLM to generate the schema that we need to build these building blocks so we don't have to maintain this UI the way it is? What if we treated the LLM as its own UI? And so that began a series of meetings in our company where we were thinking about ways to optimize our workflow builder and basically build the cookbook and the recipe, right? So that's how we transition from where we were to where we're about to go. So let me stop sharing, and I think, Matt, you have the other screen.
Yep. All right. So I am going to do a live demo, which are always fun to do and exciting. We were doing a live demo of this once to our board of directors, and that's the time when OpenAI's API decided to go down, and that was embarrassing. But I think a live demo is a lot better than showing a video, especially in this context. So I realize this is a lot on the screen. I'm going to zoom into the application on the right, but I want to show you what I'm uploading in a few different contexts. So the application with AI is on the right, ready to do a new workflow, start a new workflow, and I could do a couple of different things with it. And remember, the goal is to to have the AI create a workflow that a human would have created using the user interface that Chiz just showed, and that would have taken, maybe an hour, 2 hours, sometimes even a couple of days, depending on the complexity of the workflow, and have the AI do that in seconds. And what the AI is going to do, and Chiz will get into the more details, is integrate the information that is provided by the user, and that could either be a simple prompt, as we'll show you, or uploading a work procedure or a work order or a work pack. Integrate that with the information, so a lot of private data that is in our system about how work is done and how quality assurance is done, and the information that is in the LLM and what the LLM knows about whatever the topic is that's being asked about. So the first thing I'm going to show, and I'll ask Chiz and Hugh, are you able to see everything in enough detail on the screen? I know there's a lot here.
Yeah,
I can. I've got a white screen, but I can.
I think it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So the first thing I'm going to do is upload a work procedure, and I have a simple work procedure here. And this is for installing an instrument during construction. This is adapted actually from something some customers gave us to use in training this system. So this is a real life work procedure. I am just going to go in here, find the instrument installation work procedure. And again, you can see it has a bunch of steps, questions, move forward, stop, start. And what it's doing now is the AI is converting that into a prompt. And instead of having to build out this workflow, it understood what's in this procedure and is converting it into a digital procedure that is usable by our system immediately. And it normally takes about 30 seconds to do it. There it is. It comes up. So you can see, and this is where the AI is being least creative, because all it's doing is taking what it sees in here.
Matt, are
Yep.
you able to make the screen you're looking at a little bit bigger?
Yeah, let me do that. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll move back and forth. I just want people to see the source document, and it's kind of hard to do with
Yep.
Zoom and moving back and forth. So you saw what the source document was. Now it created this simple 3-step procedure. Inside of it has photos, the checklists, success and fail statuses through each step of that process. All it really did here was understand that procedure that I uploaded, understands how our system works, converted it into something that made sense to our system, and our system is able to now, in a matter of seconds, as you saw, have something that a customer is able to use, saving our administrative users a huge amount of time in building these workflows. Well, what if you don't have a full procedure? Very often in construction, we just have work orders or work packs. And I will just show that briefly what I'm going to upload. I have an example here. This is actually a work order for somebody doing work on my house, a chimney company that came to my house about a year ago. I blacked out my personal information, rather not share that with everybody, but it's a 1-page work order from a commercial chimney repair company, just some basic couple of lines. This is what you're going to do, and some notes about it. Very typical of a work order that you might receive in the field for construction. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to upload that work order. And it's going to do the same thing, except now it's being a lot more creative, because the AI has to look at, what do I know about fireplaces and how repairs work, and then combine that with the very limited information it has on the work order. And I'm going to create a quality assurance procedure that makes sense to somebody who wants to confirm that that work was actually done properly. So again, takes about 30 seconds to do this typically. There we go. All right, workflow created. And from that 1-page work order, we have created instructions for what the worker is supposed to do, photos and checklists it wants the worker to fill out for both the 2 main parts of the work that it identified, the fireplace repair and then a repair of the furnace. And there we go. So now you take a work order. You can imagine someone in the field has a work order. They want to upload it. The AI is now converting that into something that's immediately usable. And again, this would have required someone before to go back to their admin users and have the admin build the workflow in the workflow builder. That's how it works today.
One of the things this occurs to me, Matt, as I'm watching this, is we're often finding that where generative AI is different from earlier technology, really of any kind, isn't that it necessarily does the whole job for you, as it creates a really solid first draft. Are you finding that what you just showed is that's often how people are using it? Because a lot of people that would receive this do know how to build and do know what they're doing, but being able to say, I'm going to frame out a first draft of this, and by all means, I mean, every one of those lines or every one of those sections has a little edit icon on the right.
Yes.
So are you finding that that's a lot of the value, right? Is that it's like, look, I don't have to start with a white sheet of paper. I can just noodle it.
100%. And that's actually feedback we got from our very early beta testers. Was originally there wasn't that much edit capability in there. Your very first version had, here's your workflow. And the feedback was, well, this is getting us 80% there, which is incredibly valuable, but we of course have to tweak it. And of course that makes sense, excuse me. So as you pointed out, for each of these, you can go in and edit it in 10 different ways so that you as the user can say, okay, this got me 80%, whatever, 90% of the way there. I'm going to tweak it. I want this instruction to say this checklist to say that. Maybe I don't need a photo here, and get you the rest of the way. So that's fit for purpose for whatever you're doing. Absolutely.
And how do you guys feed selections someone may have chosen into the next round? Is there like a reference that an instance gets? Like, so let's say I'm XYZ builders, and you're doing the same thing very often. So do I begin to create my own XYZ builders set of SOPs that the AI references?
Yep. So you'll see, I mean, I started from a clean sheet for this demo, but you'll see you could have 10 different procedures here for you to select. And what happens is, if you're an admin, you're going into the user management and figuring out who's assigned to which workflows, who has the ability to work on different things. and doing all of that management for you. But yes, the idea is your XYZ builders, here are the 10 procedures or however many that I have built for my team to use, and those will be used and adapted over time.
One of the reason I brought that up is as much a chick question as you, that in that one of the issues I see coming with a generative AI's ability to create new things, whether they're forms, in this case, this is a kind of a guided form, but they can create tables out of nothing. And the kind of concern a little bit is your data model might just go all over the place. How do you guys think about that? It's a little early for most people on the call to have thought about that, but I see that becoming a big issue as these systems become more able to create whatever UI you want.
Right.
Chiz, I'm gonna hand that to you because you've become the resident expert on security and privacy in AI.
Well, there's two questions I think. One I want to make sure we focus on is your data model. So the
right.
security and privacy for sure. But the other one is, again, if every form is different, how are you keeping track of the data that we've got in a database?
Oh, yeah, sure. Chiz, you could.
So it's probably a good lead in for the next part, right, of this presentation. But you know, to answer the question, really, the way we generate data is that our system actually has a data model. We have a data model about our workflows, which says, here are the types of operations, here are the types of steps, here's the way they're supposed to be structured in terms of how we organize the recipe for you to do anything. So there's a schema for that. Now, at the same time, we treat anything you work on as an entity, which means it's something that you do that has a certain sort of set of properties that define it, what it is and how it can work. And so that's also represented as a data model. Now, when we interact with the LLM via the API, one of the things we do is that we seed the LLM with system prompts where we say, as somebody in a certain persona, right? I want you to give me information about how to do XYZ. And so we say, this is the schema that we use internally. I want you to provide me an answer that fits this schema in a JSON format, so that in that way, we induce the LLM to give us answers that are consistent with the representation of, let's say, a recipe in the system, so that the data model doesn't necessarily change when it comes to a recipe building. Now, when it comes to the entity itself, the data model is slightly different in that it might have different sets of properties. You know, an airplane has wings, a car doesn't, it has tires, right, etc. Those kinds of things. So we understand that entities have properties. We understand that the recipe itself is a schema with certain properties. And when we ask questions to the LLM, we ask it to provide information in the schema that we expect. And we also, seed it with certain keywords in our systems that we know about certain things. So we say, okay, you're going to have a checklist, or you're going to have, let's say, you're going to have a review photo. Every time you take a picture, make sure you have a review photo step. So certain things that give it consistency in the type of answers we see, so that when we get information back, we get it in a consistent format. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I want to just broaden the point a little bit, that, very often when we hear people talking about AI, they're referencing deep learning and saying, oh, your data's got to be XYZ and you got to need a lot of clean data. And interestingly, what you're pointing out is when you're using generative AI, that's less the focus than actually thinking about what you're going to do, so that someone with background like yours can turn that into a well thought out data model. So you're constraining the data it produces. It's not just going to throw things at you have to do something with later. You're saying, I have these buckets, put something in them.
Yes.
Love that. And I think for a lot of the folks that are not as technical on the call, that's a really important lesson, because that's what business people do. Certainly the upfront part of it, to say, here's how we're going to use this, and here's where the questions we think we're going to do. So you don't need to be a developer to ask that question well. You do need to be an engineer like you to be able to turn it into code, of course. But the upfront usually is the business team saying, let's brainstorm a little bit on the things that we might want to ask or include or so on. And somebody else can turn that into more of a kind of an ontology or data model. Really cool.
Right.
All right. Then the last version of the AI generation I'll show is, what if you don't have anything? What if you don't have a procedure, you don't have a work order, but you just want you just want to have a procedure created for you from scratch, and that's where you could use the prompt. So what I'll do, I'll see if this works. If somebody has a procedure that they want us to model and could put it in the chat, we'll give 30 seconds for people to put it. I'll put it in the chat and I'll put it into the prompt. I'll just pick one and you'll see how it works. And you could download this yourself and play with it if you like. So anybody, just try to make this a little interactive. Anybody want to put something into the chat?
Brushing my dog's hair.
Brushing your dog's hair.
Fur. Let's say call fur. He's not that.
How to change. All right. We'll do, oh my gosh. Okay. A bunch of them coming in.
Take one of those. Those are better than dog grooming.
Okay. Installing ductwork hangers. Okay. We'll try that. All right. Create a procedure for installing ductwork hangers. Now, the more detail I give it, of course, we'll use that. But of course, the more detail I would give it, if I had brand or dimensions, things like that, you could add, it will provide more detail in the procedure. But just for the purpose of this demo, we'll just show how this would work. So create a procedure for installing ductwork hangers, and let's go. Almost done. It's just getting that last piece of it. There we go. Okay. So it created the procedure. It has some, and remember, this is a pretty generic prompt, so it's going to give us a generic workflow. You could add more detail to the prompt. So here's basic instructions, a checklist, confirm, I'm ready to go, and then install the ductwork hangers, inspect the materials, prepare the work area, wants you to take some photos. Are they properly aligned, securely fastened, and confirm that you've successfully completed the work. So that is one example. And of course, as I said, if you add more details, as you saw with the other examples, it would give you a more detailed workflow. I'll pick one more. Here's one from one of our clients. Oh, is it inspection procedure? Okay, that's setting a document. I want to do a document right now, just for the purpose of, and then let's do Hughes, which is create a procedure for brushing your dog's hair. For brushing your dog's hair. Let's see what happens.
It's refusing, saying sorry.
No, it's just figuring it out.
I'm kidding. Yes,
yep.
That's right.
Oh, it gave us a nice detailed multi-step workflow for doing that. And you got a lot of steps in here. So it really wanted you to get into the details with lots of photos of your dog to put on Instagram of the brushing process. Check for hair tangles. All right. I think for the purpose of this webinar, you kind of get the point of how this works and the different types of ways we use the LLMs, whether it's from a full procedure, a work order, or just from a simple prompt to create workflows that are usable in the field for the purpose of quality assurance. And now I'm going to turn it over to Chiz, who will actually continue the discussion from earlier about how this is all working under the hood.
Yep.
So Chiz, while you tee that up, I'll just give a little bit of a segue. So we just talked a little bit about how a process that was in place can be made a lot easier and a lot more intuitive. And I love this idea I keep coming back to, that you never have a blank sheet of paper. And I think that's a lot of what you just saw. What I think we're going to switch to now is Chiz is going to go under the hood a little bit and talk about how some of this works. So for those of you who may have joined me for the the briefing a month ago, I think you're going to see some of those same ideas really put into actual work when Chiz goes through it. One thing I'd ask Chiz is along the way, just kind of call out lessons you guys learned when trying to get this done, because it's a really new. I mean, it's interesting. We could not have had this conversation 12 months ago. Like
Yep.
this is in fact, 6 months ago, it would have been a slightly different conversation. So it's amazing how fast all this is working. And the fact that you guys were able to, turn this into a deployed product of this complexity quickly is amazing. Awesome. So
Thank
Chiz,
you.
over to you.
Great, Hugh. Can I ask you to assist me with sharing the presentation so we can, since you have it open, as you were
Sure.
sharing it before, and
Sure.
I can focus more on the content a little bit
That's
than the
great.
mechanics.
You got it. Let's just get over to the right slide.
So just to seed a little bit the discussion, we weren't like looking to use generative AI initially to model the workflows. We were trying to learn about how it actually worked and how we can use it to make our jobs easier in terms of, flexibly generating all kinds of answers that our customers need from information in the back end. And as we began to look at how to solve that and try to understand how to actually use the APIs to communicate with the models, our VP of software and our lead developer, they focused a lot of effort really on this in the beginning, just really trying to understand how to interact with the LLM. And you'll find that a lot of effort goes into obviously prompt engineering and trying to figure out how to get the right answers consistently from the LLMs in a manner that you can have a certain degree of predictability. And there was a light bulb moment that they had. They were like, wait, what if we turn this into a way to generate workflows? We already have the steps. And if we get the LLM to give us the steps in a JSON format, because it's trained to do that, then we actually don't have to write the code to begin to build the building blocks. And so that's sort of how we backed into it. And then obviously the leadership team saw it and got really excited, and and we ran from there. So so that's sort of like the genesis as to how we got here. But we're by no means like large language model experts, in the sense that we don't know the neural network science that goes into all the way that weights are assigned to generate the tokens and to get you answers. But what we've spent a lot of time doing is understanding how to leverage the LLM itself to do what we needed to do. So in this case, we spent a lot of time trying to come up with ways of initially prompting the LLM, querying the LLM, and getting it to give us answers, right? So the first part of what we did was try to break down the prompts into, let's say, what we call a user prompt and a system prompt. So the way the API works in this case with OpenAPI is that you can assume personas. In this case, you're the system or you can be a user. And then when you're the system, you have certain responsibilities and tasks that can be given to you. And then as a user, you have a different set of responsibilities and tasks. So we generate a system prompt and we say, okay, for instance, if you, in the example of generating a procedure to brush a dog's hair, we can say, okay, you're the system. You have this schema that represents a workflow, a series of operations for a workflow. You're going to generate workflows, a workflow that you're going to present to me in this JSON schema format that will describe how I go about brushing, a dog's hair. And so one of the first things it's going to do is sort of like frame the answer in, let's just say, operational steps. So if you remember the demo you saw that Matt presented, one of the first things you saw was the LLM generated a framework. You saw 3 or 4 stages in this case, prepare to brush, brush dog's hair. And that's sort of like a framing the workflow in terms of stages, in terms of what it's going to do. And so while it's doing that, we ask the LLM to understand what the entity is. In this case, it's a dog's hair. So it's going to describe a dog's hair, and it's going to have certain properties like, well, the color is brown, it's fluffy, or other types of things that are associated with, a dog's hair that you're brushing. And then we have user-generated user prompts where we say, okay, now fill in the details for each of the operational steps that you're going to take that explains how you're going to brush this dog's hair. And that's where it actually takes the next series of operations to generate those steps and to fill in the details. And I don't know if you guys actually noticed, the third stage in what the LLM generated was to prepare the brush. And that's where you can say, well, I'm going to give it, a modified input, because that should really be a first stage and not the third stage. You prepare the brush before you brush the hair, not after you brush the hair, right?
Mhm.
So the LLM will come up with different kinds of answers, and then you can give it feedback and have it reorganize its answers. So we go to the next slide. We can probably just focus on one portion of this slide. So what I've just described is the series of steps that we take to generate the operations. So we have a knowledge platform, which is our schema, the way that we represent workflows, and also different concepts in our systems, rules in our systems, rules like, well, if you're going to take a picture, you must review the picture. So every time the LLM asks somebody to take a picture, make sure you ask the person to review the picture that you've taken. So there are rules like that sort of govern how the LLM will generate the workflows that we're generating, right? So that's part of cumulative.
Chiz, if I may, there's an
Yes.
interesting point I want to pull out, because most companies they already have a lot of knowledge. So what you guys have done is bake in knowledge, and some of this is really specific and some of it's maybe a bit more general, right? But you're
That is
able
right.
to, one of the issues always with large language models people are concerned about is it's going to go off and do uncontrolled things, where
Yep.
we've just spent 100 years or whatever the number is, building things. So we kind of know how to do this. So it's
Yep.
really exciting that what you're seeing in the bottom kind of cylinder is Cumulus has, across trial and beta and so on, developing this. You've learned that there's stuff that you need to tell the LLM to
Right.
get it to do what you want reliably.
Correct. And
Yep.
that's exactly right. So as part of the knowledge platform is rules, keywords, and sets of operations, as well as the schema that we use to represent workflows. So all of these things are used to augment the prompt, and we basically ask the LLM to generate the steps that are part of the operations that you're going to take when you do work. And so, one of the things we thought about earlier on was, well, do we want to expose this to the web, as part of security questions? We know where our customers are, and we know that most people are not completely satisfied or happy, comfortable with things just being accessed from the web. So what we actually do is we use LLMs that are already pre-trained with information. So they're not necessarily going out to retrieve some sort of augmented data, right? At the moment, all they're doing is giving us information based on what they've been trained on already. So if we go to the next step.
If I can ask one more question, sorry.
Yes.
When you
yes.
take in the user prompt, do you use kind of any classic deep learning to take that English and turn it into kind of versions that make better sense? In other words, people can ask the same question a lot of different ways. And
Correct.
sometimes it makes sense to kind of pre-classify that, or do you not find that necessary?
No, we don't do that, not yet. And we don't find it necessary to do that at the moment.
Cool.
So it is possible that you can ask questions differently about doing the same kind of task and maybe get slight variations.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep. So the next block essentially is where the LLM begins to generate details, right? In terms of given the user prompt, given the system prompt, given the knowledge base we have about rules that govern how the LLM is supposed to behave. And not only that, basically the schema that describes the structure for the workflow, then the LLM begins to generate details. So it fills in workflow steps for each stage, and it does that, for every stage until it's complete. Now, the other part, which is what we're really excited about, is that we have a customer private knowledge base. So in this case, customers can basically allow us to build up a repository of procedures. It could be work instructions, it could be manuals, or in this case, even guides of a different kind, but they all form some sort of a curated database of knowledge that the LLM can actually pull from and say, okay, this is where I'm going to get information about how to do certain tasks. So in this case, in this way, you can actually safeguard some of the security concerns that customers have as it pertains to where the data comes from. But at the same time, it actually allows you to help a customer, so to speak, build a library of procedures in terms of how they do work, so that whenever they want to do any specific type of work, the LLM will always get information from the library based on the customer's knowledge. So the customer is always going to be building, let's say, workflow steps, instructions based on its own know-how on how to do the work. And so it allows the customer to generate, let's just say, customer accurate and customer specific workflows. And I think one of the biggest advantages of this is it probably reduces the validation burden, because it's getting workflows from what originally exists in terms of how customers do their work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, love it.
Yep.
So how does that relate to retrieval augmented generation? Is that an example of that?
So it's a great question. There are two ways you can do it, right? You can do it as a retrieval augmented generated data set, or you can fine tune the LLM. And honestly, we are considering, and we've been looking at both approaches, and each one has its own benefit, right? So for us, with the retriever, with the RAG approach, it's a little easier in the sense that, the LLM can tell you what it knows from its work, but it can also source information from the database and tell you, okay, well, here's where I'm basing my information from, and it helps explain origin, right? And it's going to tell you, well, I got it from here, and this is how we're going to do work. And it doesn't necessarily train the LLM to do that, to do the same type of operation better in the future. But if you were to fine tune it with this information that you're getting from the customer's repository, then the LLM will get smarter and smarter and smarter and smarter about how to do work, and can, augment its own capabilities. And the only, some of the disadvantages to doing it that way is obviously, the fact that there's computational complexity into fine-tuning an LLM, and maybe costs associated with doing that. So both approaches are approaches that we're looking at, and we haven't completely settled on one way of doing it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's often faster. It'll perform faster if you fine tune it, but you're less flexible if you're using RAG than if you're using RAG. You're more flexible with RAG. Really interesting to hear that you're in the middle of making that decision based on your customers' needs and the actual performance. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and I suspect that security and performance will be, chief inputs that inform how we go about doing this.
Do you find when you fine tune that being able to explain the decision is also not quite as easy as with RAG?
Yes. Because I mean, when you fine tune, obviously you don't necessarily know how the algorithm augments its weights, and eventually how it comes back with an answer, right? That's the whole idea of, you can't really explain how it arrives at what it arrives. So you may have a greater validation burden. In that sense.
Yeah, love it. So for those of you who may have missed the last conversation about what RAG is, a way of thinking of this is fine-tuning is changing the model itself, whereas RAG is giving it reference to a document or set of documents. So it's like one is internal to the model and one is external. And they're both, as we just discussed, have pluses and minuses. Thanks for that.
So then once you essentially generate the steps, right, then the LLM maps the output into our application, which essentially builds the UI interface using the workflow and presents it to the user. And in this case, the user can actually begin to make edits, specific edits to the workflows or edits to the data properties that the LLM came up with. So for instance, you might say, hey, I want you to generate a workflow for clean an airplane. Let's say an A380, you pick an A380. and the LLM will come up with a workflow for making sure you clean the airplane, but it's going to define the A380 with certain properties. So it might say, hey, it weighs 1 ton, or it has, its wings are 200 feet, and it has, I don't know, 600 seating capacity. And in your view, yes, those are properties of the A380. You might say, well, but that's not relevant to what I want. I actually want to know, how many cabins does it have? How many toilets does it have? How many rows does it have? So the kind of things that may be specific to your willingness or your desire to get it cleaned properly. So those are the things you can sort of edit as you're proceeding through the workflow step and process. So you kind of fine tune it yourself manually, and you get an answer. So the workflow we generate gets stored in our backend. And one of the things we're thinking about is, in the future, we can get a compilation of all of these workflows that do all kinds of work, and we can actually begin to look at things like, well, how do people do work? Which workflows gives us, let's say, the most efficient outputs when it comes to users? And you can define efficiency in very many ways. You can define it as, well, which workflow gives me the least reworks, or which workflow gets finished in the most, or in the shortest time possible. So there are all kinds of possibilities in terms of how you can begin to categorize workflows that do similar or different types of tasks, and begin to lead the conversation on, let's say, the best way you do work, right? So that's part of what we do here.
That's super exciting. One of the interesting things you make me think of is, you often hear people say, I'm working in the business, or I'm working on the business. And a lot of what I've heard you talk about, and this is a general point, I think, for Cumulus, but specific here, is LLMs give us the ability to take a little bit of a step back and abstract things, so that you can look at a bigger picture than you otherwise might be able to handle because of your software or just the time that you have. Really exciting.
Yeah, and I'm actually just seeing a comment from Paul.
Yeah.
And he's saying, if the focus is quality, consistent, and reliability, there seems to be a strong argument for the RAG approach. And I agree.
Yeah.
You know, it's a strong, because you can explain it, right? You can say, hey, well, maybe you'll have less of opportunity for hallucinations, right? Because it's going to give you evidence / factual data that you can trace. So yeah, definitely, that's one of the advantages of a RAG approach.
I think the flip side that we've heard before, which I think is why, Chiz, you guys haven't just said, good, let's do RAG, is there is a security concern sometimes that the right prompt, and I think you can control for this, but the right prompt might allow people to download things. The other one is RAG can have performance penalties. It can slow things down depending on how big or complex. So the reason you guys are in the middle of weighing this is obviously figuring that out, is how big are we going to be referencing? If it's small documents, then it's an easy decision. But if it's big documents, then people don't have a lot of patience for waiting too long.
Yep, agreed.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, folks, we're kind of bringing this to an end. I'd love to add, if there are any other questions, we've got the whole team here. Any other questions or thoughts? One thing I want to call out, a question that came out earlier that I believe Matt answered, but I think the question was, can you export some of the this is before we talked about AI, but I want to make sure it gets an airing, is are you able to download some of these SOPs? And right now I believe it lives in the app. Then it's a thing that the team is looking at.
Yeah, it can be downloaded for now from our backend because they're JSON files, but then we are going to be making it downloadable from the app. That's something that has come up a lot from our early users.
So while we're here though, we've got about 5 more minutes. Are there any other questions? I really appreciate Chiz and Matt, you're doing this and being kind of responsive as I've asked these questions along the way. Let's give it 1 sec, but if not, I'll tee you up. Where do you see the 2024 on the AI side going? There's a lot of talk about what OpenAI may or may not do. Gemini just did an absolutely horrible job of announcing and then saying that their announcement was faked, which is insanity. But there's real tech under the hood. They may have had a real PR disaster, but there's real tech and DeepMind has proven how amazing they are. So how do you guys think about, and if anybody pops in with a question, we'll ask it, but these last couple minutes, how are you guys looking at next year other than biting your nails to hope that it doesn't totally change again?
Chiz, you want to go first, then I'll go?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I've also been totally excited about Gemini. And Matt can tell you, I've been singing the praises of Google Insight. I'm like, I can't wait to get my hands on Gemini because I actually like the idea of multimodal input.
Yeah.
If you think about generative AI as a new set of UI, I feel like it just uh, allows us to be more capable in the ways we source input from different types of users and different types of applications or even scenarios. And I'm looking forward to being able to investigate Gemini, so to speak, try to integrate it with our system and just see how much more capable we can be in terms of how we process those documents that come in as, like as a procedure, or maybe videos, or maybe different types of audio instructions and things like that, because I think it makes us more capable. And generally speaking, I anticipate that there will be obviously much more improvements on LLMs, and not only from a large, complex, you know, LLM that you get with an API, but more capable models for let's just say mobile applications
for the
that we
edge.
can actually begin to integrate and begin to get like much better performance for niche use cases. And I'm looking forward to integrating that in our system.
Love it.
Yeah, Chiz, you stole mine. I was going to talk about on, the on mobile LLMs is really exciting. Is a really exciting development. I think more broadly, though, there's AI has already gone through almost, it feels like, a couple of hype cycles this year where it's, hey, this is exciting. Oh, well, none of these companies make any money. Or, oh, this is exciting again. Well, these are just chatbots. And I think what you're really seeing, and Hugh, you alluded to this earlier in the call, is you're just starting to, so companies like ours, and there's thousands out there that have their own existing products, their missions, something, a business they're building, are and started earlier this year figuring out how does the new AI products help me. The products are only first starting to come to market now.
That's right.
And that's only going to accelerate. And I think that's going to be the most exciting thing for AI, isn't the companies that start from scratch as AI companies, even though they'll probably do really interesting and exciting things. It's going to be seeing where existing platforms that have built up their own data sets and experiences can use these tools to accelerate the development process. So for us, for example, what we created with Cumulus AI, that basic functionality was on our roadmap, but probably 2 years away.
Yeah.
That we would have this general workflow builder, mobile, you could build any workflow. And it just accelerated our roadmap by about a year and a half and made it 10 times better than it would have been if we developed it using traditional methods. And I think that's exciting for the industry as a whole, and why I'm a uber bullish. And I think you haven't even seen the impact that AI is going to have on the economy and construction specifically. It's only just starting.
I'm going to finalize with a kind of generalizing on a point you just made, and that is, the thing about AI is often you're finding, whether it's generative AI or classic deep learning, demos often look really cool, but it's real products that move the needle. And often it's not so hard to stand up a demo that does something cool because you can control the environment. But what you're saying, I really like, and that is that very often you find it's most useful when it's hitting a company that already has product market fit and is able to supercharge or do things that to your point would have either been impossible or really hard to do with traditional either deep learning or with kind of hard coding.
Yep.
So we got a quick question from about, did you guys deal with any design related AI generation? Sorry, it popped ahead. Looks like Chiz answered the question or clarified the question.
No, I was asking for clarification on the question. Yeah.
So I think the response, I can't tell who the first name is, but using AI to create 2D or 3D plan sets. It sounds like that's not actually what you guys do as a company. So that maybe not really what you do.
No, not us. Not what we do at the moment.
Awesome. We had one last question about integrating building codes. And I think the cool thing about what you guys do, and you may get a call from a guy that runs a company called The Link, about actually being able to tee off various different inputs and saying, okay, well, how do we turn this into an SOP or a way to actually execute? Which I
Yep.
think, honestly, I think specs are an obvious place for that. As again, we may chat about that offline.
Sounds good.
Well,
Yep.
we're at the top of the hour. I want to thank everybody for coming. And I think if there are other questions, I recorded this, so we're gonna post this online very shortly. I encourage you in that posting, I'll give you the ability to reach out to the Cumulus team and ask any further questions, or hopefully say, you know what, I'm gonna pick up what you're putting down. So thank you, everyone.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Right, and thanks for everybody for the great discussion.